Well, ladies and gentlemen, here we go, and I am so excited to be here for year 4 of the EMS Leadership Summit, and I am going to bring you a great presentation of breaking down the silos that hinder organizational success. I got to tell you, year 4, I am so excited to be here, and if you can see me, this is what my excited face looks like, and I just want to give you a little bit of tidbit to think about. As we're getting into the fall here, there are only 14 Fridays left till Christmas. Yes, Chris, did you have to go there? And I did. A little bit about me, you can see it there on the screen. But one of the things that we have to be able to think about as leaders, are there silos in our organization? And the answer is yes. And I got to tell you, this just isn't an EMS thing. This is really what's going on inside organizations all over the world. And do they happen intentionally? Well, sometimes they do. Do they happen because people just don't want to interact? Well, sometimes they do. But today, we're going to talk about breaking down the silos that hinder organizational success, and we're going to talk about a lot of different things that will give you the tools necessary to assist your organization in really working towards making this something that becomes extinct. And when we think about this from a success standpoint, we've got to be able to work as a team. We've got to be able to work to reach the vision of the organization. We've got to be able to work on the objectives that are going to reach the vision that make the organization successful. But we have to be able to do that across an interdisciplinary team of professionals in our organizations. And today, we're going to talk about those things that are going to be needed as we address this really big and horrible problem. So, here's what organizational silos really define as. And if we look at it, basically, this is when departments or this is when employees, they just don't want to play well together in the sandbox, right? I mean, they feel isolated, they feel unwilling, they don't feel empowered, they don't feel like sharing information. And this could be because of their own behavior, or this could be because of the behavior of the leaders inside the organization, inside the department. It could be just the personalities of the employees in the department. But we have to be able to remember that when we have people that don't want to communicate, that don't want to interact, they're unwilling or unable to share information, we become problems. But if we think about it even more simply, this basically is turf wars. I mean, silos often form unintentionally. When an organization is growing, it's natural when we think about the things that we have to do to make ourselves successful, that individual employees will focus on improving their process and their skill sets. But when we think about that globally, it becomes incompatible with those departments who now need to work outside those departments. There's research out there from Stanford University that indicates that almost 40% of the employees believe that other departments in their organization have their own agendas, have their own goals, that they're only working for themselves. And only 29% are really trying to truly collaborate across the lines to make sure that the business is going to be successful. So when we think about this, we've got to be able to ensure that employees within the organization do not feel isolated or unwilling or unable to effectively share information. So Chris, what are you telling me? There's silos in EMS? Oh my gosh, are there silos in EMS, right? We've got dispatch in the field. We've got clinical versus operations. There's differences in silos with leadership and who's in charge of this department and who's in charge of that department. What about day shift and night shift? Are they siloed? Are they always thinking that one's better than the other? And I think that this becomes very, very dangerous when it comes to what we're trying to accomplish inside an organization. There are different responsibilities. As the chief of EMS, I was in charge of daily operations. When I was the clinical director for an agency, my job was the clinical aspects of the system. But I got to tell you, I didn't want operations to infringe on my clinical area. I didn't want other leaders telling me how to run my department. I didn't want other leaders getting involved with my people. And, this is a challenge. I got to tell you, this was really, for me, based on a lot of egotism, right? Right? Is there egotism in EMS? Well, there is. And it starts when we're paramedics. It starts when we're EMTs. It starts when we're their field providers, right? Because we don't want anybody telling us what we need to do. Don't question my medicine. Well, you know what? Then when we became leaders, don't question my leadership. Don't question my direction. And this is really, really challenging when it comes to developing a successful organization. So when organizational silos exist, it really starts to develop unhealthy relationships. It starts to develop that toxic culture that's breeding in an organization. We lose sight of company goals. And I want to touch on something here that's really specific. It's not that we lose sight of company goals. We might not know what the company goals are. One of the common threads that I'm going to talk to you about today is it is imperative. I feel that the most important document inside an organization is the vision statement. We need to look at that vision. We need to make sure we're working towards that vision. We have goals to reach the vision. We have plans to reach the goals. If you've been in my lectures before, if you've been in my classes before, this has been a common thread, because this is one of the biggest failures in organizations. When I go inside organizations and consult with them, the first thing I ask is, do you have a vision statement? And the answer is always yes. The next question I ask chills everybody when I say, who can recite it for me? And that's really difficult. So we're going to come back to the vision, goals, and plans, because this is one of the challenges that create organizational silos. And of course, it's a communication breakdown. Whether it's a communication breakdown from leadership, whether it's a communication breakdown from department leaders, that's one of the big challenges when it comes to the existence of silos. So why do organizational silos exist? Let's go ahead and get to the blueprint. Let's go ahead and get to the nitty-gritty of why this happens. It could be that organizations, it could be that departments inside those organizations, they have different priorities. We are moving at a different pace. When groups within the business have different priorities and they've lost the sight of the overall goals, silos are going to pop up. Turf wars are going to happen. Let's think about it from the standpoint of the things that each department has to do. The operations has to make sure that the resources are out on the street when they're supposed to be out on the street, posting where they need to post. But now clinical operations needs to be in the field to ensure that they're doing evaluations to make sure that the EMTs and paramedics are delivering the highest quality of patient care. But wait a minute, the operations supervisors don't want the clinical supervisors in the field. So now it really is going to now cause that challenge. I got to tell you, this is something that happened in my tenure. This is something that happened in my career, that the operational supervisors didn't want the clinical supervisors in the field because it was messing with their operational focus. It was messing with their operational whatever the heck they wanted to tell us, right? But when we think about this from the overall goal of the EMS organization, we want to deliver the highest quality of patient care. While the operations supervisors focus on, making sure that we're meeting the, priority 1, priority 2 response times of 8 minutes and 59 seconds, 10 minutes and 15, whatever it is, my job from the clinical side is to make sure that the EMTs and paramedics are delivering the highest quality of patient care. How does that go against the vision of the organization? Sometimes each department have their own goals, and we do. But remember, those goals need to align with the vision and the goals of the organization. And one of the things that I think we need to do inside organizations is share what the departmental goals are with the other departments so they know. And this is one of the things we're going to talk about when we get to the strategies of how we can break silos down. Sometimes we set our own responsibilities, and is that necessarily bad? It's not. But are we communicating those? That's where the challenge is going to come in. So when we think about some of the things that cause silos in business, one of the things that I want to hit you with is absence of team spirit. The board, the board worker, the people who aren't motivated, the people who are inspired. And just because they feel that way, they are not going to take the extra effort in making sure that their work is done as great as it could be. They're not going to collaborate across departmental lines. They don't want to talk to anyone else in the organization. They're going through the motions. They're not engaged, and more overly, they're probably disengaged, or they could be actively disengaged. But one of the things that's the challenge here is sometimes it's the leadership, or sometimes it's the organization, or sometimes it's the department that's really pushing these people to be on the outside. What do you mean by that? It's that feeling of belonging. It's that sense of community. We have to ensure that people feel like they are, part of the agency. You got to remember, we invited these people into our organization to help us to be successful. And silos occur when the team or the entire department loses sight of that big picture in the organization. When you have a feeling of belonging and you feel like you're together and part of a team, there isn't anything that you won't do. And team spirit is really crucial to the work. It builds a stronger team. It builds a stronger company. By having stronger team spirit, this is going to boost motivation. This is going to help people become inspired. This is what's going to help people feel like they're part of a team. And when we think about this from a feeling of motivation, from a feeling of inspiration, we need to be able to ensure that we're increasing high productivity and engagement levels. A dynamic team is all about performing at their best, right? We need to be able to ensure they have a high engagement level, because this is the gel, this is the glue, this is the whatever you want to call it, where we rely on each other, we have superior understanding of what everyone else is doing, we know each other's strengths, we know each other's weakness, and we know where we need to step in to help the people who are in our departments to do the best work that they can. When we start working together as a team, and I don't have to worry about being, having a lack of self-confidence because I'm not comfortable in my skills, but when I feel comfortable in the fact that I may not feel comfortable with my skills, but my coworker is willing to help me to grow, or my supervisor is willing to help me to grow, this is what's going to boost my morale. This is what's now going to give me the good spirit of being part of that team. It's going to make me feel confident in my job. It's going to make me feel confident in my responsibilities. And this is where this really kind of boosts into. So when we have a lack of motivation, when we have a lack of inspiration, this is where we could start to build the foundation of silos. This is where we could start to build the foundation of turf wars. And we've got to be cognizant of that. Remember, as leaders, we're in charge of this process. If you have silos in your organization, if you have the characteristics we're going to talk about in this presentation, you have the overall responsibility of fixing this. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. All right, so next on our list of causes of how silos build in organization, and I left this one to be very simple, is competition for limited resources. Are there limited resources in EMS, Chris? We really shouldn't have to ask that question, because when groups within organizations compete for those limited resources, organizational turf wars, organizational silos can result. Budgets, allocation for monies. When we think about the zero-sum game, when resources are provided to one department and denied to another department. Does that happen in EMS? It happens in EMS all the time. This becomes highly competitive, and executives and leaders tend to focus on their team's needs rather than the organization needs. And, we see that all the time when that happens, right? In organizations, resources always are limited, and employees must work with the scarcity of what's going on, right? You always hear that it seems that the clinical department is always getting their stuff cut before anything else. It's always cutting educational programs. It's always cutting clinical programs. It's not getting that clinical equipment, or it's getting the clinical equipment and we couldn't get those new ambulances this year. It's a constant competition for time, for money, for space, for material, for supplies, for equipment, for blah, blah, blah. It's continual, and competition for any of these resources will inevitably lead to resentment and interpersonal and interdepartmental conflicts. So we've got to be able to ensure that we're being as fair as we can be when it comes to making sure that competition for resources are equal and fair. The next in our reasons that silos build in business, it's because of poor communication. And we're going to spend a couple slides on this because this is super duper important. And that's right, I just said super duper. When teams fail to communicate, organizational silos often occur. And think about it, right? You know, this starts at the executive level, especially in the case where trust and communication are absent in the leadership's team decision-making process. Think about it. You know, department leaders who compete for resources may fail to communicate adequately and may set departmental goals that are, at odds with other departments. And think about it. When there's lack of communication or poor communication, people will inevitably start to make up their own stories, and those stories will become their truths. And this is one of the things that we've got to be able to look for. Communication is vital to the vision and success of the organization. And I talked about vision, and we're going to get into why that's important. But everybody needs to understand where we're going, how we're going to get there, when we're going to arrive, and then my responsibility in reaching that vision. But it all starts with great communication, right? And a lot of times, leaders have to be able to take the responsibility into creating poor communication. It's really part of poor leadership, because if you're a good leader, your communication with your team, your communication with your workforce, your communication across interdepartmental lines are as stellar as they can be. My last operational role I took, there was a challenged department, right? So I sent an email out to the organization before I showed up. I said, hey, this is me. This is my leadership philosophy. This is who I am. Tell me a couple things. What do you like about your job? What do you hate about your job? Tell me about your leaders. What do you think is missing? And if you were the chief of this department, what's the one thing you would change and why? And there was so many comments that said, we have lack of communication. So one of the things when I went into the organization and started working is I created communication on so many levels. I developed a closed Facebook group. I made sure that there were postings of, objectives and posting of messages and posting of whatever it was. And then I was posting them in the firehouses. And then we were doing, people started to complain that there was too much communication. So when we think about leadership, you are the catalyst for poor communication. You have to be able to ensure that you make that a strength. Because when you're communicating with people, they're not making up their own stories. They understand what's going on. They know the objectives. No one can say they're not clear. And that's where those biggest challenges are. Other things that happen with poor communication, I added demoralized employees. Because people feel like they're not part of the agency. We talked about that earlier. This is really the fault of the field supervisors and the field leaders. We like to talk about members in our organization. We like to, make fun of other members in our organization. The great one that I like to do all the time is when you take your phone out of your pocket and you see who it is, and you got to show the room who's calling you, right? This is poor communication as well. You're supposed to be the resource for every single person in the organization. We have different beliefs. We have different morals. We have different political affiliations. But we're all working in the organization, and we need to be able to be together in that, in that team, in that group, to make sure that we're all going to be successful. So when we think about why communication is important, Chris, do we really have to talk about why communication is important? Yeah, I think we do, because I think that it's so foundational that we forget it sometimes. When there's strong communication, it avoids confusion. Remember when I said that people will create their own stories? I learned this lesson during the Ferguson event in 2014. I was the chief of EMS at Christian Hospital, and there was no good communication that was coming from the event leaders. You talk about unified command. There was a lot of challenges when it came to communication during this Ferguson event. The fire department and the EMS agency and the police department, once all these agencies got on scene, they were now creating the narrative. They were now creating the movement and the plans, and they weren't communicating with the people who were serving the community. Well, because I didn't have any information to share with my workforce, they thought that I was keeping information from them. And now they started to create their own stories. This was a great lesson for me. And what we did was we developed a morning breakfast for the crews that were coming in the morning. We gave them a snapshot of what happened overnight. We told them exactly what we knew, which is sometimes nothing. But you know what? They appreciated it. And communication in this morning breakfast, it provided a purpose to tell the story. So good communication is important. One of the other things that communication does is it creates accountability. Because now I'm able to set the objective and I'm able to say, clinical, this is what your responsibility is. Operations, this is what your responsibility is. Fleet, this is what your responsibility is. So now we can create accountability with the expectation. Another thing that happens in organizations is that we're great in creating expectation, but we fail at ensuring accountability. All right, so next on our list of what causes silos to develop in organizations is wanting immediate results, overemphasis on immediate results. You know, there's a strategy in business, it's called ROWE. It's results only work environment. And this was created by Callie Ressler and Jody Thompson. And if you're not familiar with the ROWE strategy, sometimes in business, this could really work, but it has to be set up the right way. This strategy focuses on the output of employees rather than how many clock hours they're working each day. Does it work in EMS? It can. But anyway, when we think about immediate results, when groups within the organization focus extensively on achieving short-term results, organizational silos tend to occur. You know, so sometimes we have this get it done mentality. You know, there's no time for anything else. And this now takes away from crossing the interdepartmental lines or talking with other departments because I am focused. I've got to get this completed. This has to be done right now. Now, sometimes that has to exist in an organization. But one of the things that we have to remember is to share that message with the other departments to say, you know what, the business office can't really work with any departments right now because we're trying to get the annual budget done, or we're trying to get the end of month done, or we're trying to get whatever that is. We have to be able to communicate, which now goes back to our communication challenge that we were talking about in the previous slide. Next on our causes of why silos develop in business, it really comes down to poorly thought out incentives. You know, this sets teams at odds. One of the things that I started early in my career as a departmental leader was I told my people that if they had all the objectives done for the week, we would get out at noontime on Friday. And I talked to my boss about that, and I said, boss, what do you think? He goes, all right. He goes, I'm all right with that. But you know what? The dispatch center isn't leaving at 12 o'clock. The operations supervisors aren't leaving at 12 o'clock. And what do you think happened there? This sets the teams at odds. This wasn't my intent. My intent was to motivate my people. My intent was to get the work done. But now the operations supervisors had a bit of challenge with the clinical supervisors. They had a bit of challenge with the clinical leaders. And this really resulted in a lot of strife between the operations department, a lot of strife between the dispatch and clinical, and it was really bad for the overall morale of the organization. Lessons learned. Did I make mistakes as leaders? Let's chalk this up to one of the mistakes that I made. One of the things that happens too when organizational silos get in the way of business success, oh my goodness. Remember what we talked about, letting people off early at 12 o'clock? Silos breed toxic work culture. I cannot emphasize enough what people thought about the clinical department. It bred bad relationships. Now leaders are getting involved because, you know, the operations manager had to come to me as the clinical manager and said, what the heck is going on? And this isn't fair. And I'm like, get out of my office, man. Don't come in here and tell me what I can do with my people. But you know what? Again, my egotism right there, right? This guy was coming to me saying, Chris, there's a problem. And instead of listening to him, I was basic. And if I have to be honest with you, I probably told him to get out of my office, right? This is where distrust comes in. I have a bigger agenda in my department than I do for the organization. And the fights will get worse. All right, let's go ahead and go to our next slide. I love this slide because I love toy trains. When we are in a silo mentality, things will get in the way of business. It derails company objectives. The vision of overall success is affected. Now, I talked about this a little bit ago, right? So why is the vision statement the most important document inside the organization? I want you to think about this for a second. Go ahead and think about a door for me. Now go ahead and think about a boat for me. And again, if you've been in my classes or if you've been in my lectures, you've heard me say this before. But I got to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, this is a foundation for who I am as a leader. When we think about servant leadership and the importance of servant leadership inside an organization, the vision statement has to be front and center. When I said think about a door, when I said think about a boat or a car, whatever it was, you didn't see the letters D-O-O-R. You didn't see the letters B-O-A-T. You actually pictured a door and you actually pictured a boat or a car, right? We are wired to think in pictures. And in the absence of a vision, we don't know where we're going and we certainly won't know the journey that's going to get us there. And when I ask the organizational leaders, when I go into their company and say, tell me about your vision statement, do you have one? Yes. Who can recite it for me? If the leaders of the organization do not know the vision, why do the workers need to know the vision of the organization? Instead, we need to be able to ensure that the vision is front and center. We need to ensure that the vision is against everything that we do. You know, when I got to Christian Hospital in North St. Louis County, I asked the workforce, what's the vision of the organization? And they said, we're here, we relocate the sick and injured. Well, I guess that's a vision, but we created a vision. And in short, the vision was to, deliver the highest quality of patient care with clinical excellence, be leaders in our community, be role models for our career field. And everything that we did had to ensure that it met the vision. Then we had to develop goals to reach the vision. Well, how do we achieve clinical excellence? How do we become leaders in our community? How do we become role models for our career field? And then everybody in the organization needed to know their responsibility in reaching the vision. So now when we start to think about organizational silos and we start to think about people are now doing their own thing, if they don't align with the vision of the organization or the goals to achieve the vision of the organization, now they're on their own path. But a lot of times, ladies and gentlemen, that happens because people don't know the vision or they don't know the strategic goals of the organization. We've got to be able to make this front and center, and everybody needs to march towards the vision every day. All right, let's go ahead and continue. I want to go ahead and talk about breaking down silos and why this is important. One of the things that we have to remember is that breaking down the silo mentality will help create trust between the teams, and basically it builds a path, a stronger path to sustain growth and success inside the organization. And there are 4 things that you really need to pay attention to, right? So it encourages collaboration. We have to be able to make certain that there's good collaboration inside the organization. And that means that I've got to reach across the different departments to ensure that I can get my work done or to ensure that I can meet my goals to reach that vision. It reduces duplicated work. You'd be surprised about how much work is being created inside different departments that don't need to be. One of the other things that it does is it improves knowledge retention. What does that mean? Well, one of the things that we want to be able to think about is if I have an understanding how the dispatch or the communication center works, or I know how operation works as a clinical person, it gives me the opportunity now to be a little bit more knowledgeable about what I need to do compared to what the other departments are doing. And of course, it also facilitates continuous positive successful productivity. So we must be able to overcome. A strong company culture is very important, right? So when we think about the vision of the organization is where we're going. The strategic goals of the organization is how we're going to reach the vision. And a strong company culture is the behavior of the workforce on that trip, on that journey of reaching the vision. One of the things that's going to be very important is we need to have a good cross-functional interaction between departments. This is what's going to set up the organization for its long-term success. We march together to meet this vision, right? Yeah, fine, I have a clinical component. Fine, you got an operational component. Fine, you got a communication component. But you know what? If our components aren't walking step by step, we are not going to be successful. So what I want to do now is I want to give you 6 strategies on how we can break down the silos that are inside our organization. Number 1, we have to be able to communicate a unified vision. What is the organizational vision? Again, if you have a vision in your organization and you can't recite it for me right now, go to the book that it's in, dust it off, tear it up, throw it out, get your workforce to the table, get your leaders to the table, and together build another vision. And then make that vision front and center. Put that vision where everybody can see it. Put it on banners, put it on badges, put it on koozies, put it wherever you want, but make it front and center. And everybody has to step towards the vision every day. This answers the question, why are we doing this? Why? Because we want to be, deliver the highest quality of patient care. We want to be able to be leaders in our community. We want to be able to be role models for our career field. That's why we have to do this. And that's why it's important. So we've got to be able to ensure that we're communicating the vision. We know the goals to reach the vision. We know the plans to reach the goals. And moreover, everybody knows their responsibility into reaching that vision. Number 2 is we've got to be able to hold everyone accountable. We've got to create shared accountabilities. This is where everybody pulls together to be one team. Everybody needs to understand where we need to be in how we're going to go forward and be successful. One of the companies that I went into, I was tasked to develop a leadership development program for an organization. They were a manufacturing organization. They actually made displays that put your clothes on, right? So they sold displays to stores that they would put clothes on for you to buy, right? And one of the things that they would do is once they were done, they shipped those out to another warehouse or whatever the process was. So one of the biggest challenges was the operations department and the dispatch center had to communicate on a regular basis. The dispatch center embedded a dispatcher in the operations office. So rather than have to pick up the phone or rather than have to walk down to the dispatch center, they just were able to turn their chair and say, hey, I've got this order going. Do you know when the process is blah, blah, blah? How do you think this did for creating great accountability of getting that work done? But one of the things that we've got to be able to think about is creating this shared accountability, because it's really important. And when we think about this, it's all about defining a goal. It's all about being able to measure its accuracy. It's all about being able to empower people to achieve the expectations and then holding people accountable to those expectations. Accountability has got to be very, very important. And the accountability that you're holding me to is the same accountability you need to hold everybody to. There's an organizational accountability that has to be upheld. There's a team or department accountability that has to be upheld. And then individuals have an accountability to reaching the vision. You want to create an organization that doesn't have silos? Hold people accountable to the expectations of the vision and the goals to achieve the vision for everyone to be successful. All right, strategy number 3, we need to bring the team together. We need the workforce. We need the workforce more than they need us. In the great resignation that's going on right now, we are coveting every single member that comes into our organization to assist us to be successful. We covet the individuals that we invite into our organization to help us be successful. We need them. I used to joke all the time, tongue in cheek, that as leaders, if we can get rid of the workforce, our job would be easy. But that's not practical. We need the workforce to help us be successful. Our job as leaders is to get work done through other people. And then we got to get the very best out of them. Remember, we're all different. We got different beliefs. We got different morals. We got different religious beliefs. We got different political affiliations. But the one thing that we have in common is that we all work for the same organization. And it makes no difference who you are inside that organization. You've got to be able to treat everybody like they are the most valued employee. One of the things that I talk about with my clients outside of EMS is if the secret sauce to creating a great organization is treat your workforce like they're your clients and customers. Then watch how they treat your clients and customers. Strategy number 4, leaders have to lead this endeavor. If there are silos in your organization, if there's communication challenges in your organization, if there's a morale issue in your organization, this ultimately is a leadership problem. We have to be able to set the standards for others to follow and model the collaborative behavior that needs to be inside an organization. People on different teams will be unlikely to collaborate and will remain in silos unless they see their leaders modeling collaborative behavior. It's the company leaders that need to set the example to demonstrate that they will expect a cross-functional teamwork, a cross-functional collaboration of all the departments. If the leaders aren't doing that and setting the standards, there's going to be challenges, and then there's going to be silos. We need to be able to drive alignment from the top down. I love this slide. The lack of alignment with top leaders will cause the machine to break down. And when the machine breaks down, we break down. What movie is that? Can anybody quote that movie for me? Well, I just quoted the thing, but what movie was that? Anyway, you have to be able to address conflict as it rises. If we're starting to see that there's conflict between the departments, we've got to step in. If the leaders of that department can't fix it themselves, we don't let that fester. It's not the sole responsibility of the departments to fix that. We've got to be able to get in the middle of that. And then we have to be able to ensure that everybody knows how the work that they're doing inside that organization fits into the vision of success. Strategy number 5, we need to shift mindset and behavior. EMS is one of these jobs, ladies and gentlemen, that stress is high. We see things we shouldn't see. We interact with people we shouldn't interact with. We experience things that other people shouldn't experience. And sometimes the mindset of the workers, the mindset of the organization can be negative. But we've got to do everything we can to ensure that we're spurring a positive culture. Everybody needs to know how important they are to the success of the organization. I don't care if it's a guy who has a job in your organization of being the janitor that cleans the bathrooms and sweeps the floors. There is no one job in the organization that's more important than the other. We have to be able to remember that everybody is needed to reach the vision. I had a friend of mine that went down to NASA. They were going to look at developing a high reliability organization in the hospital that she was vice president at. And she came across a janitor who was sweeping the floor. A guy was a janitor, she said. He had a broom in his hand. And she asked the janitor, she said, "What do you do here?" And his answer was, "I send people into space." It wasn't I clean the bathrooms. It wasn't I empty the trash. I send people into space. We need to be able to ensure that we're developing that positive culture. And that's what's really important. Let's go to strategy number 6. Educate, train, and work together. This was a lesson that I got back in the old days before electricity. I was developing leadership classes for my clinical team. I was responsible for the FTOs, and every week we would set aside a day where people would come in and we'd tackle another leadership topic. Well, the dispatch center, folks in the communication center, they got wind of it. They said, well, can we come? Yeah, you can come. Sure, that would be awesome. And then more people wanted to come. From the operations supervisors wanted to come. I got to tell you, this took on a life of its own. But when we started to educate, when we started to train, we started to work together. We started to we started to collaborate more. I even put people from operations in the comm center and clinical in their own little task groups to do different leadership projects. This allowed people to get to know each other. This allowed people to learn how to respect each other. This allowed people to laugh and work together. And it really kind of helped in busting down those strategies. And that's the one thing that I wanted to bring up here. Sometimes we're trying to talk to people in other departments, and sometimes it's frowned upon. We never want to discourage interdepartmental bonding, right? This should be a departmental culture. You know what? It should be an organizational culture. It's counterproductive when we say, I don't want you going in a dispatch center. It's counterproductive when we say, leave those operations supervisors alone. We've got to be the one who foster camaraderie. We've got to be able to align with the teams as needed, and we've got to be able to set the standards for others to follow. One of the great things that happened when I was working at MedStar in Fort Worth was my job was to, we had to change the new employee orientation program. It was a little bit out of whack. We had to bring it up to date. And one of the things that we did is we got with the other leaders of the departments and said, do you guys want to be part of this? Do you want to be part of the new employee orientation? And of course, the answer is yes. Come in and talk to the new candidates about what your department does. Come in and tell them what your department is responsible for. Why does your department exist? How does your department work? Where do I find you if I need you? More importantly, we started to send the candidates as part of the new employee orientation to the different departments to sit and watch them do their work. Well, that kind of morphed into its own little thing. Now, the business office wanted to come and ride with the paramedics. They had the opportunity to ride in the field one time per year. Then the dispatch center wanted to come and ride with the paramedics. Then we thought, let's send the paramedics into the dispatch center. They had the opportunity to see how they take 911 calls. They had the opportunity to see how they manage the system status plan. And it answered a lot of questions. One of the things that I got from a dispatcher one time was, oh, so this is why you guys continually do this. Because she's seeing things in 2 dimensions, and then we have her in the ambulance where she's looking out the windshield and seeing things as they're transpiring. It gives her a different perspective as to what's happening, right? So when we think about these organizational silos, they're there, but we can knock them down. We can make one organization. We can ensure that our department is heading towards the vision and creating the success that we need to create. Oh, that's a lot of information, right? So that's it, man. That's my show, and it's time for me to go. And I appreciate the opportunity of coming here for year 4 and sharing my expertise and talking about how organizational silos get in the way of success of business. We talked about what silos were, what turf wars were. We talked about what causes them. We talked about how to break down the strategies to break those silos down. Your relationship with other departments don't just affect your own work. They just don't affect the work of your team, but it also impacts your organization as a whole. And we've got to be able to ensure that we are able to collaborate effectively and efficiently with those other departments. We got to understand one another's roles in achieving the organizational goals of achieving the vision of success. Once we're able to put that into play and we're able to ensure that everybody understands that, we're going to be able to have an organization that doesn't have silos and that everybody is marching to the beat of the same drum. Ladies and gentlemen, again, so honored to be here for year 4. I want to come back every year until I'm not allowed to talk anymore. And I appreciate you spending time with me. If you have any questions, here's my contact information. Please feel free to reach out. Check out my website, www.chriscebollero.com. There's a lot of great leadership stuff there for you to consider. But more importantly, I want you to support the EMS Leadership Academy. These folks who are putting this summit on, they work hard for you to develop the resources that need to be developed for you to put your best foot forward to take care of the most important resource in our organization, our workforce. And remember this, your workforce is the only resource in an organization that will appreciate and value, the only resource that doesn't depreciate. We invest in our workforce and they become as strong as we want them to be successful for our success. Again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for allowing me to visit, and I look forward to visiting with everyone again real soon.